Hello everyone, and welcome back to the next AK Upgrades video in the series. Today, this is actually going to be pretty much finishing up the rest of the build with this installation of the Sureshot Armament Group USA version of the Mark 2.1 chassis system. I've already opened this up to check that everything's alright with it. This isn't much of an unboxing, but I did want to talk about what's in the box here. So, of course, the chassis itself. Note this is the Mark 2.1. I didn't go for the Mark 3 simply because I won't be needing it with how I'm going to be setting up this rifle. A bunch of extra screws, or at least I presume that these are extra screws because there are already a bunch installed here on this. A rather amusing set of two stickers here, as well as a Sureshot branded sticker, which is kind of cool. As far as shipping time on this itself, this did take a little bit over 3 weeks before I got it. On their website, I believe it said it would take about 4 to 6 weeks, so completely acceptable and a little bit faster than they were saying, which is always good. But I'm not going to be focusing too much on that sort of stuff. In this video, I wanted to mostly focus on the installation itself, talk about any issues that come up, if there are any, and hopefully there aren't, and I will focus on an actual review of how this performs out at the range, most likely next week or the week after. Point is, it won't be in this video because I want more time after I get this installed to actually run it and try it out. So, we're going to go ahead and get started. As you can see, and as I mentioned earlier, this does come pretty much all assembled, so it's kind of easy to see how things need to be fitted. The reason I'm recording this installation, Sureshot themselves have a very well done installation video on their website itself. However, I've heard people mention some issues getting this mounted to the rifle, fitment issues and all of that, which I imagine will mostly happen with the mounting piece right here, which will be the first part we'll install. So, hopefully it all goes according to plan and is no different than their installation video. But we shall find out right now. One thing you'll want to note is, as you saw in the box earlier, that was everything that was in there. Of course, I already removed all the shipping materials and any personal information that would be attached to it, but this does not come with any tools itself. You need to source your own. In my case, that's fine. I have a torque wrench and this wrench as well, which works great, but do keep that in mind that if you don't already have the hex keys or Allen keys, then you're going to need to buy those as well. And also, not all of these fasteners use the same bit either. This one's quite a bit larger, so you can see I do need to use a different bit here. Okay, so here we are, and yeah, we will actually need to put some more screws in, so that is all good. Let's go ahead and pop this off here. And this is going to be the first part that goes in. It's right below the rear sight block here. This is the mounting platform to which everything else is going to go on. This is the part I've heard people have issues with, so hopefully it just goes right in. A little bit of a tight fit. Even then, it's not that bad. I just had to push on it a little with my thumb, as you saw. It's not that bad at all. Very cool. Next up is going to be the upper handguard, or rather, more than just an upper handguard, as it does have the rail segment here, which goes behind the rear sight. One thing about this part is you do need to put this in according to their instructions at a 90-degree angle here. Otherwise, it won't fit over that rear sight itself. Probably the hardest part of the installation thus far, and even then, it wasn't that bad. You do kind of need to finesse this into place, making sure that the gas tube they have in here, as this does replace your regular gas block, making sure that it actually has room to clear your gas block, as well as that this right here interfaces with the mount. And this is a bit of a strange part as well. I didn't really notice this. I did watch their installation video before I even bought this, but I didn't notice that your gas tube lever here, there's not actually enough room for it to fully close anymore. It's not needed, of course, because they have their own gas tube in here, which is locked in by other means, but that is kind of weird. So that is something to keep in mind. At this point, they actually recommend mostly reassembling it, so they do say to go ahead and put the gas piston and the recoil spring back in, so that's what I'm going to do. On the installation instructions on their site, at least when I'm making this, maybe they'll make a different version in the future, but they are showing this with the Mark III. This is the Mark 2.1. So instead of installing their dust cover, of course, I'm just going to put my regular factory dust cover back on here. So here's another interesting part that I didn't think about, didn't realize would be an issue beforehand. Notice how far back this rail segment goes. Normally, when you go to reassemble your AK, of course, you can just kind of push this in, and then once you get a little bit further, which I can't do, you would push it down right about here and just slide it the rest of the way forward. In this case, like I said, you don't have the room really to do that. So I'm kind of having to put this in at an angle and then turn it. So I got to pull a little back. And there we go. So you can see I got it in now, but definitely a lot more tricky to get it lined up just right than it is on a normal one. Recoil spring, assuming you're using a normal recoil spring and not one of the telescopic type, is going to be completely straightforward, just like so. And the dust cover as well, at least on this wasser, because it is a fairly loose fit, is nice and easy to put on as well. But that bolt carrier was a lot more difficult than I was expecting. So that is something I didn't really notice it would be an issue. If you get the Mark III chassis, I believe that this part of the rail doesn't go as far back, because the Mark III chassis has this and then the back rail segment, because it is a fully railed receiver cover, kind of connects in. I'm not sure how it holds zero, if it's just tensioned in or whatever, but something to keep in mind if you do go with the Mark III. It looks like on their installation video that it's easier. Not sure. On the Mark 2.1, it certainly does take a little bit of finesse to get that back in. So next, we need to put these 3mm screws through the mount itself. I pointed the wrong one. These ones right here. You got 4 holes. You can't really see from this angle, but there you see. We got 4 holes, and that's the ones we need to screw into. Now, at this point, things are a little strange from what I'm used to with Sureshot's instructions compared to how you usually do these types of screws, in that they warn you to not over-tighten any of these. However, they also don't give a torque value. So I don't want this backing out. This is a rather crucial piece because it mounts everything to it. So I'm going to kind of go by hand and get it roughly around probably 12 to 15 inch-pounds. And then I will be using Loctite just to make sure. And I guess later when I'm using this, when I actually do the review and all that, if the thing falls apart, then I'll know to torque it down further. But that is something to keep in mind. That is an odd part of the installation, to not give any torque values at all, aside from saying to not over-tighten. So that's at least the case for the USA one. Keep in mind there's also the Sureshot Russia. So I don't know if they maybe have different instructions for the Russian one where they do provide torque values. If anyone watching knows, then please do leave that in the comments, because I would love to know if there's an actual recommended torque value, because the USA installation instructions do not give any whatsoever. Now we install 2 of the longer screws, which just go right here and right here. Luckily, you can't get these mixed up. They are longer. They're also a different thread pitch, so if you do put them accidentally into here, they won't even thread on, so you don't need to worry about that happening. And again, they don't give a torque value, so I'm just going to apply Loctite and get it decently tight to where I'm not worrying about potentially over-tightening it, and where it shouldn't knock itself out of place with recoil either. So the next step apparently is to adjust the tension and position according to Sureshot by adjusting a screw that is in here, of which there is not one. So it does seem they either skipped a step or they meant to install this from the factory and didn't, but I mean, they did include it, so It's fine. Because of the position of this and because the other hex key I was using right here was getting stuck a lot, I'm going to use a different tool for it that's a bit longer. That way I have leverage on it and it can't get stuck in here and just be a bit of an annoyance to get unstuck. Again, I'm going to apply Loctite. They don't say not to use Loctite, so presumably it'll be fine. Some scope mounts will recommend you do not use Loctite, for instance, but this should be all good anyway. Okay, it's probably tight enough, I assume, at this point, so I'm going to leave it there. And then similarly, we do have two more of these tensioning screws, one on each side, so you can see here they are. Just got two of these. These are shorter than the one I just installed, so easy to differentiate them. So at this point in Sureshot's installation instructions, they do mention that the top barrel clamp is no longer needed. However, they don't actually show it being removed. So I'm not sure what they're referring to with that. But then the next step is to go ahead and tighten the gas tube bolts. Again, they very explicitly say to not over-tighten them. They did already have these installed, so we'll see. I'll leave it. I'm not going to Loctite these ones. And these do use a 2.5 millimeter head at this point, so ever so slightly smaller than what we were using previously. Now for the moment, things are going to actually start coming together. Next is going to be to install the lower handguard. What's interesting here is we do have actual M-lock right here. I mean, granted, the whole thing's M-lock, but you can see the way that it actually kind of tensions up against and tightens into the upper handguard is with these, so very interesting. So one thing that is cool, by the way, that I should mention, if you look at other reviews of the Sureshot handguard, the older one, I think the Russian version, I think it's either the Mark II or maybe it's also called the Mark 2.1, which gets a little confusing. But they do have a version there, which there are reviews like on TFB that show that this doesn't have a cutout for your sling attachment on the handguard retainer, or at least on most AKs. So in that review, they do say that you need to cut it off. You don't need to do that anymore. You can, well, it will require a little bit of finesse to get this to align properly, but it's not that hard. It can be done, and then we don't need to cut anything, which I do prefer. I was looking at a Texas Weapon Systems handguard, which kind of does a similar thing to this chassis, but big difference I didn't like with that one is you do need to cut your sling hook right off. So not ideal. I do prefer to keep the gun restorable, even though I never intend to resell it or anything. It's still kind of like the open-close principle in a way, but that's up to you to decide if this is something you quite like, which I personally do, or if it's lost on you and you don't really want that, then that is fine as well. But that is something I specifically sought out and is a pretty big reason why I chose this chassis over some of the alternatives. There we go. So I'm kind of sliding it on from the front, which seems to work pretty well. And then they do recommend using the hex wrench again to get this aligned properly. Maybe not. There we go. So how I got this in, and of course it's not in all the way yet, but it's a bit hard to do this on camera, hence why I went off camera. But I was holding it up against myself, and if you push this out, the handguard retainer itself, push it out as much as you can. It's only going to go to about here in this case because the upper handguard segment does prevent it from going any further. But do that. Turn the sling so it's pointing, or the sling attachment right here, pointing down as much as it can. It's not going to go down all the way, of course, either. But then take the lower handguard segment and slide it on from the front up here and just run it all the way down. And then it just kind of lines up and pushes itself into place here. And then I just need to push it the rest of the way. So at this point, I'm going to kind of go my own way a little bit from their directions. I don't want this retainer ring here, the handguard retainer ring, to wiggle around too much, so the lever, which is very hard to see, but I'm going to try to push on it through the M-lock, or maybe through here even, just to get it locked down as much as I possibly can. Probably won't be able to fully lock it. It was already a kind of tight fit with the Sureshot, but hopefully I can get it. And as for this, I don't think I mentioned this yet because I, again, had to go a bit off camera. Just kind of wiggled this a little bit up and down because it wasn't wanting to get pushed into place perfectly. So just kind of did that a little bit and just pushed on it pretty hard. And it did go in, as you can see now. It needs to back out a little bit more, but there you go. You can see right there, it's all lined up. So we'll get to that in just a moment, but I am going to try to get that lever down as much as possible. I actually did manage to get that fully seated. A little bit hard, but it is nice to not have to permanently modify the rifle that way. This will be a bit of a bitch to take off, if I ever do, which I probably won't, but it's fine. So, now, we take this screw from the very start, which was connecting right here. Of course, we'll just put it back in. So this will sit right here. Make sure that's lined up still. This is another fairly important part, so I'm going to go ahead and Loctite it again. Holding this so it doesn't fall out, of course. Just putting this through here. Not lined up. There we go. It's got that hand tight at the moment, so I'll finish it up with this. Again, no known actual torque value. So I'll just go until it seems to be pretty tight. Again, hopefully the Loctite will fix any sloppiness there may be with that. Alright, so we are just about done here. The very last thing we need to do is to take these M-lock retention screws right here and just tighten them the rest of the way down. So I'm just going to do that. Actually, that one was already pretty close to fully tightened down. And I know M-lock on an aluminum handguard usually can go to 35, but I'm just going to do the same as everything else and not going to use the torque wrench, just going to get it tightened down, which is probably about, as I said earlier, around 12 to 15 inch-pounds. This one was quite a bit looser, but we are good. So that is that. There is a little bit of a gap here, which I looked at their actual installation, and it does have that. It's just I didn't really notice it before because the one they showed is all black, so it's harder to see there, but a lot easier to see on this FDE and camoed up rifle. But it does seem solid so far. You know, nothing's egregious and moving around on its own. It shouldn't. We'll find out how it actually does under recoil. I'm going to go ahead and just put all the rest of the stuff that I actually want on here. Alright, so here is the build as I will be testing it, and probably this is how I'm going to have it forever. The reason for this, so of course I don't have a light on here, I'm just having an aim point and a sling. No light because this is a backup rifle to my main SLR 104FR, which does have a light because it's my home defense rifle and all that. But since this is just a backup rifle, I could, if my main rifle went down, switch to this. The main reason I wanted to set this up was to have it as a practice rifle with cheaper ammo, because this is 7.62 by 39 as opposed to 5.45, which is getting a lot rarer, whereas I already have a lot of 7.62 by 39 as well. So that was the main reason for this build, and that is why it's set up this way. It's going to be a good way to test the Zero regardless, because this mount, of course, is connected to the chassis itself. So even though I don't have any lasers or lights, I mean, you know, those don't need to hold zero, but no lasers up here or anything, it's still all connected. So we'll see if there's any shift in Zero when I'm shooting this and all of that. As far as the first impressions, of course, there's going to be a lot of that'll change and a lot more insight that'll go into this when I actually do shoot it in a few weeks when I make that video and all that. But one thing to note, of course, is the bolt carrier is a lot more difficult to put in than I was anticipating with this, with how much it sticks out. And another thing to keep in mind is this mount here is solid. So if you're running a cleaning rod, of course, you won't be able to actually have it. I'm going to go ahead and just put it in just to show you. Now, of course, you would need to remove your muzzle brake on a 74 or a 24 millimeter thread in general. You're like on an AK-103 sort of platform, but in this case, this is nice and low profile, so don't worry about it. I remember when I did my original Zenico video, people were freaking out about that quite a bit. But yeah, you can see right here, that's as far as the cleaning rod goes in. And then it hits up against this part of the clamp right there. So, another thing that's a little weird is all these extra screws. I don't know why they sent this many screws. I followed their instructions to a T, and I don't see anywhere else where I could even put in any more of these. So, as I said, I don't think I missed anything because I followed their instructions and I looked at it myself too, and there's nothing else. So, seems like they sent an extra pair of all the rest of the screws that you would need for an extra chassis, which is good if anything happens to strip out, but they weren't needed, so I'll just store them. So, with that all being said, if you have any questions on the review, so this is pretty much like an installation review and first impressions. But if you have any questions on how this will actually be performing, if you're watching this way in the future, please do watch the review video first because I may have already answered your questions. Otherwise, if you're watching this immediately, thanks. And yeah, really, thank you for watching it so quickly. But also, feel free to leave those in the comments and I can answer them when I actually do the review, or if it's something small, I can answer them right now. Or any other questions at all, yeah, feel free to leave those in the comments. But gonna see how this runs now, and here's hoping that the next time I do a video on it, it's not me saying that it sucks and that it's actually pretty good. Certainly a lot more difficult of an installation, surprisingly, than the Zenico, which at the time I thought was quite difficult. There were some tedious parts, which I'll go over more in the final review. That is it for this video, though. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video and in the actual review of this. See you all then. Take care.